Great.
Nice. Yeah, well, I'm Will's older brother, but I guess Kate, you're the only person that didn't know that before. Um,
What? I
despite-
knew that.
you did?
Yeah.
Have we met?
No,
Oh,
but
okay.
I just knew that. Well, also I hadn't known that you are both labeled as Will Phelan and Conor.
Ah, uh, I guess I had to specify older because, well,
Oh, fair. Okay.
you like that, Will? That's a little razz at your hair. He's on mute. I love it. No snarky responses. So seems like a lot of familiar threads here. I studied GIS originally, or geography back at University of Richmond, my undergrad. I picked up the degree because my mom was forcing me to get a second and or a third major, and I really did not want to do what she recommended, which was a triple major in chem, biochem, and bio. Sounded awful. So instead, I was just perusing like the course websites. And I just remember like looking through the list of the classes you could take for geography and being like, what? You can like study this stuff? Like you can actually take courses on like maps and mountains and like, heck yeah. So immediately became my preferred courses and degree during my undergrad. Absolutely loved it. I had great mentors in the lab and for research and everything, even in my undergrad. And then from there, went off and spent 2.5 years working for a nonprofit in Maryland, where I was again given, well, it wasn't like a great place to work, but they gave me a lot of creative leeway to really push the boundaries of GIS that was being done then. So it was a pretty powerful experience as far as being young, right out of undergrad, getting to work on those kind of projects. And we got international attention for some of our work, which was cool. And they're still continuing that now, which is neat. And definitely helped me kind of gain a leg in that department heading towards my master's, which I did out at the University of Montana, and was also GIS, spatial analysis related, but with a wildlife focus on Siberian tigers in eastern Russia. I never got to go. I never got to see them, unfortunately, but it was fun work. And my master's program really introduced more rigorous scientific statistical methods and spatial statistical methods to my skill set. And that more or less led to where I am now, where I'm essentially heading up the spatial stats and mapping and cartography and everything for a very large research program here at University of Nevada, Reno, or a project rather. It's actually Lacey's advisor reached out to me early last year about some part-time general mapping work when she heard I did GIS, and then offered me a full-time gig heading up this project, which has been pretty awesome. Get to work from home. It's a good mix of like some days I'm getting just to make maps and do kind of fun design things, and then other days I'm spending more time like in R doing more stats, coding, trying to dive deeper into there, and then other days I'm like managing field crews. So it's really kind of a nice, well-rounded experience. Yeah, so I suppose when I think about mapping, and given that there's also, by the way, I gotta take this off because this I'm getting so warm from this teacup salad. Whew, it's so good. So Kate and Rachel, I'm sure you'll probably understand a lot or find corollaries with your own careers with some of this stuff. But when I think of mapping, I suppose I think of really trying to think, like two major themes that I carry with me when I think about mapping. And the first is map literacy, and like, and with that, like map as a tool. And then the other one is like just maps as art, and as like as a way of thinking. And I think that with that first one, map literacy, a metaphor that I like to kind of fall back on is this idea that you always hear when you're learning a new language, like Spanish in high school, that, and it kind of took me a while to really fully grasp the value of this. And Mike, I know you speak German. I mean, Lisa, you too, right? You speak German as well? No?
Portuguese, but
Portuguese.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I know I'm probably the least like bilingual on this call, just because I know I'm not bilingual at all. And but yeah, I always hear it. It's always like the kind of classic line about another language is that it's like a whole other reality. It's like a whole other way of seeing the world. And I think that that directly relates to being able to understand maps, being able to read maps, and using maps, and thinking in a spatial manner. And that people plug and play on Google Maps and kind of all the classic interfaces that we rely upon now and that we use in our day-to-day life. But I guess when, like, even in my free time, I'll pull up maps and map out things for my for recreation, skiing, hunting, mountain running, and anything like that. So I think that there's like a kind of like speaking another language. There's another level you reach when you're just spending so much time with maps that you become really adept at being able to understand what you're looking at, interpret what you're looking at, and then bring that to your surroundings. And in a beautiful way, it gives you that second reality. When you're standing somewhere, you know what's out of sight, you know what's over the next ridge, you know to a certain degree what you can expect. But I also think it's critical that it doesn't remove the mystery from that experience, because people might say, oh, well, if you studied a map of an area for 4 hours before going there, doesn't it kind of take away from that experience of exploration, that experience of like finding that place? And I think I would liken that to someone saying like, oh, because you learned Spanish in the classroom, that isn't that the same thing as going and experiencing Spanish culture? And I think that obviously there's a huge difference between those two things. So I think that generally people should expand their map literacy. I'm always kind of amazed at people that are doing activities that require a pretty high level of spatial awareness, and how little they seem to understand about how to simply read maps. Because I think it's something that seems intuitive, and it seems like something that should be easy to do to understand a map. I think there's that kind of like classic. You ever heard of the Dunning-Kruger curve? Yeah, Lisa's nodding. It's a great graph. I can probably draw it out for you really quick. So I don't know how you can see that. So this is like a general, I don't know, how would you describe it? Sociological theory or something like that. But it's like on the x-axis, you have confidence in your experience or confidence in yourself. Sorry, that was on the y-axis, you have confidence in yourself. On the x-axis, you have actual experience. And they've mapped out like time and time and time again across like any variety of skills or experiences that people start off as beginners, and after very little experience they get a little bit of knowledge, and then they're like, oh, I got this figured out. And then you learn a little more, and then you enter what's actually called the pit of despair, where you start like you spend enough time with it to realize that you know very little, And then like only after a ton of experience do you end up here where you're like actually an expert. And I feel like in no way am I bragging about this, but mapping might be like the only thing in my life where like I think I've actually like gotten into this zone. And I think that a lot of people, especially with like the proliferation and ease of Google Maps and Waze and stuff like that, a lot of people spend a ton of time like right in this zone where, because you can, you know, type in a destination for point B and it takes you there, that like you think you know how to read a map and it seems pretty straightforward. But it's a whole other thing, I think, being somewhere that's unknown to you and having a paper map in front of you per se and trying to put together what's what. So I guess that's like my plug for map literacy and map as a language, is that I just think people should spend more time with them because they're fun too. And being able to like sit like in a coffee shop in a town, knowing what's around you, knowing the names of things, knowing what's over that next ridge, like that lake in the distance, where that leads. I think it's a pretty powerful way to engage with your surroundings. And then the naming aspect of it as well, I think is a huge component that people, I don't know, like maps tell stories, and that's kind of another classic phrase I'm sure that Kate and Rachel are familiar with. But like, you look at a topo map, for example, and it's just littered with names of designated areas such as wildernesses, peak names and river names and street names and city names, and all those got named for a reason. And learning those stories is just, I think, is a fun and fascinating way to kind of gain an understanding of the history and context where you spend your time.
Conor, what do you think it is, like, or why is it that some people like really don't like maps? That like you just said a minute ago that like it's really important and they're fun and fascinating. That certain people they just are not drawn to maps. Like, do you know, like in your experience, what has been like the kind of the main cause of that? People are like, they're too confusing, they're boring. Like, what about it?
I think it's, I think that as with anything, there's also just like a spectrum of kind of your natural ability to interpret spatial awareness. Like on a micro scale, you know, you played basketball forever, and you can think about how like certain people on the basketball court, like they just don't move in a way that's like, do you understand like the space around you? You know, like a micro level. They're like, they might be a very athletic individual, but like their awareness of someone out of sight, how they're moving, where they could possibly move, you know, the ball is coming, all that kind of stuff like that. I think there's a huge spectrum of that, people's ability to understand where they are. And I'm always kind of surprised, and I probably shouldn't be, because I'm often the one that's like looking at maps the most, and like we'll go out with a group hiking or skiing or whatever. And I'm always kind of surprised to hear comments like, oh yeah, I've got no idea where we are. And it's not even like, well, which direction's like north, couldn't tell me.
Yeah. And
things like that. I think a lot of that is just time spent with these interfaces and with these products, and you will develop that. It's just like time spent with the language, right? If you watch a foreign movie in a language you've never heard before, like you're not understand the word they're saying. But I bet if you watch that movie 100 times, you would start to tie together like certain, like, okay, oh, that was a distinct word, that phrase meant with this. It's just time spent. And I think people that aren't super spatially aware don't spend a lot of time, I guess, honing that part of their brain. When confronted with a map, it just compounds.
It's definitely not something that's like you are forced to run into all the time, especially nowadays, right? That you have GPS and you have, I mean, you even have Uber now, right? So you don't even need to say, I want to get to the museum. You just have you type in the name of the museum and some guy swings by and picks you up and you have your head down the whole way and you don't even know what you passed. You don't know any landmarks on the way. So like how especially it's accentuated. But yeah, I think spatial awareness is funny that way. You're right. That it's like there's not a kind of forced learning curve. Like if you went to live in Spain, you'd eventually have to pick up some phrases because you want to buy food. You want to talk with your host parent, whatever. That spatial awareness, you can kind of just go through it being oblivious your whole life and it's okay.
Yeah, I think that it's like anything when you're a certain distance down a road that you've chosen to follow and then someone like gives you a glimpse of the other road, it's just like, whoa, I don't want to deal with that. Like I'm kind of set in my ways. And I think that people find comfort in these services like Uber and Google Maps not forcing you to have to engage that part of your brain. But that, so when you like, all of a sudden you see like a topo map of like a confusing area, it's like, oh my God, what the hell am I looking at? And I can see how that would be daunting. Whereas I think that kind of my natural instinct is I get uncomfortable when I feel like I'm floating through a space and I'm not aware of like what's what. That makes me more uncomfortable than the opposite.
Actually, I'm glad MJ is back because MJ is one of these people that doesn't tend to lean towards maps.
He was pretty much describing me, Connor.
Why is that?
It's not that I don't lean towards maps. I just never grew up really using them. And I've always like spatially, like gauging distance. I mean, ask well, or any directions have never been a strength of mine. And due to that, I just haven't given it too much attention. Like to this day, like names of streets and how far that is in relation to our house. We've now lived in Jackson almost 3 years. I couldn't tell you. It's just not a natural strength of mine. And it's not that I dislike them. I just never spent a lot of time using them, which is why your family has been great because I feel like you pull up a map every conversation you have. And so I feel like I've actually grown quite a bit just through simply those interactions.
Kind of, we literally had a Skype call with mom and dad where we had them in the corner of the screen and it was just Google Earth, like pretty much with the whole Earth in view, just the whole time sitting there. And like occasionally you'd mention like Russia or Reno, and like it was like a fun activity for me to see like how close can I get on one click and then just zooming in. I was like, oh yeah, I miss Connor's house. You know, like it's a fun challenge, but we have a huge map in our kitchen at home. It's like so ingrained in us.
Yeah, we definitely grew up with maps. And but the kind of a funny thing to your point, MJ, about the city streets is that's like one, I would say, that's one aspect of like my spatial mind that I am awful with street names because I go purely off of like geographic and like visual landmarks.
Okay.
So,
yeah, because I'm also
or
very
like
visual.
like just go down to like Sinclair. I'm like, okay, is that like the one past that building or the one past that building?
Exactly.
I know it like by cardinal direction and like visual, but yeah, I often don't bother to learn street names either.
I mean, Kate's working with the city of Boulder. Do you know like every single street name in Boulder?
I know a lot of street names, but I'm also like I have actually like never been a person who goes off of landmarks. I've always been a person who like goes on the street name, which I think, I don't know, like
that's interesting.
Yeah, like my parents actually were like, I grew up in Fort Collins, Colorado, and they were like, you should memorize all the major streets and like what order they go in from east to west and north to south.
But so they actually pushed you to do that.
I guess my mom was definitely less on that train, but my dad, right now, I could tell, yeah, my dad was like, you have to know all these streets. And so ever since then, I think it's such an interesting thing because like I would always tell people directions based on street names, and I still do that. and a lot of people who work at the city and a lot of people who I work with are like very street oriented. And like when they look at a map of Boulder, they like immediately know where they are most of the time. Like you can be talking about something and someone will look at the map and they'll be like, okay, I have oriented myself now. Here's where we are, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, so that's really interesting.
That's cool.
But yeah, like there are so many different ways of like wayfinding, I guess. And like some people have like more of a tendency toward it and others don't. And yeah, like Connor, what you're talking about with like all of these apps and Google Maps, just making it really easy for us to get from place to place, I think is like, yeah, what like people definitely lose a little bit of the knowledge of the place where they live.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So.
And if people are fine with, if they don't want that like mental burden of having to like memorize how to get everywhere they go, that's fine. But I think there is something culturally lost in the like that people spend time designing these places, these cities that we live in, and the natural landscapes. You know, I think there's something valuable about reading the landscape to a certain extent, beyond just like the ability to do it from a navigation perspective, but like just the like culturally, like people have walked these streets for, you know, years, or they've like wandered mountains for eons, and like they've always went off the same landmarks, and like having something to like show you a blue line telling you where to go. I think there's something lost there. But and kind of to that point, here I'm gonna share my screen really quick. So like something funny, this is Missoula, right? Lacey and I love this place dearly. Lived down here, went to University of Montana for our master's programs. And just like one of those instances of a story that probably many people who drive and wander and even live on these streets have no idea about. When you zoom in, you start to see these extremely like, do you see this area here? Do you see something off with what you're looking at? Right? Oh my gosh, and like Kate, the transportation person, you must be going crazy. It's like this beautiful north-south cardinal grid, and then just in the middle is like this bizarre angled section. And it turns out that way back in the day, when Missoula was a big logging town, which it no longer is by any means, there were two guys, Higgins and Brooks, the two logging magnates that ran the town. And like they were basically gods in Missoula, and they had separate ideas and competing ideas of how they thought Missoula should be laid out. And they just started from opposite ends and started building the city towards each other. And I think it was Higgins was like, oh yeah, there we go, Higgins Ave. Higgins was like, it should be cardinal, north, south, nice grid. And Brooks was like, no, it should align with the general trajectory of the river, and it should be going away from that way. And then they just collide, and we have this area called the Slant Streets, which is all like this mess in here, where you have like all these strange intersections and weird blocks that just don't align with the one next to it. And it's something that people probably don't spend too much time thinking about, like, why is it the way it is? And I think that there's just fun stories to be had in understanding that spatial reality of the place you spend a lot of time.
Is there any way to fix that kind of thing? Or like, I mean, Kate probably knows too. Like, is that just set in stone, or does someone like, or are you looking at maps like, all right, that neighborhood is bogus, we gotta figure that out?
No, that would never happen. I mean,
unless you're like Napoleon.
Unless
you're in France.
Yeah, the amount of private land ownership going on there is like the amount of parcels that you would have to completely redo, and it would never be worth it. Also because, like, what would the ultimate goal be? To make it all like uniform grid looking? Now it's like part of the story, you know, it is what it is. There's just like a few more roundabouts than you'd have normally.
Well, if you read, I think it's The Paris Wife, it's all about that. It's like this family that basically France just decided that they're going to just kick everyone out and make this beautiful, like, I don't know, I think Arc de Triomphe is the center, and they have, you know, the spokes coming out. and they just destroyed all these homes. They're like, we just want to redo the city and make it look beautiful. And I think The Paris Wife, or one of those books, is like all about that. This woman who just gets kicked out. They're just like, sorry, you can't live
that
here.
actually happened.
Yeah, no, it actually happened.
That's
they're like,
wild.
sorry, all you people.
Oh my gosh.
So funny.
Yeah.
Connor,
Yeah.
do
Go ahead, Mike.
you know your 100-meter pace count walking?
No, because my steps are perfectly 1 meter. No, do you know that off the top of your head?
Mine, yeah, 60 on my left leg only.
What about your right?
What does that mean?
Yeah, you only count your left leg. So 1, 2.
Yeah, interesting.
So it'd be 120 steps, I suppose. But
Was that from the military?
yeah, I mean, everything you're saying has like Will's, question. How come some people aren't interested? I think a lot of it is your circumstances, and I grew up with the almanac in the car as we're driving up to Buffalo, right? Like, pull out the almanac, look at the map. But the Army was definitely where I learned how to use, a map. I was drawing in a grid, an azimuth, shooting an azimuth, and cutting through terrain and terrain association. And I mean, it's a perishable skill, undoubtedly. I mean, watching you, doing what you were, planning the ski routes last year, man. Is that 2 years ago now? Holy smokes.
No. It was last year.
Last year.
It was like a year ago exactly.
Okay. Yeah, that's right. March. Yeah. I mean, it was phenomenal, just unbelievable. But yeah, there's, I think, your circumstances will demand that. If it weren't for the Army, I highly doubt I would ever know how to, draw an azimuth or shoot a back azimuth from a terrain feature, that's however many miles in front of you that you can see, and, conduct a pace count to navigate to, whatever point you're looking at. So,
Yeah,
I mean,
and that makes me think.
city dwellers, we don't need that anymore. It's a good skill to have if, should we ever live in a pandemic and be forced to,
I kind of wanted to ask about that, because we kind of use examples from cities and being on roads, but I'm kind of wondering, I don't know really how much of a question it is, but just what you look at in like natural terrain versus in city terrain, right? Because I don't think about associating buildings and landmarks when I'm in the city, but I think about associating terrain landmarks if I'm out somewhere.
Really interesting. Yeah, like there are some, like our friends who live like a mile away. It's just like I go take a right hand turn on the main street, go down, and at that crazy tattoo parlor, take a left there. It's just like, and then you pass
is that like sensory overload? Do you think that like when you're in nature, it's like that peak stands out, or that huge tree in the distance is really obvious, where in a city it's like, which restaurant, there's a 5,000 between my house and yours? Is it just like sensory overload, do you think? Or
Are you asking me, or are you asking?
no, I'm asking you.
I mean, I think for DC, because it's in a very grid pattern, you don't need to, right? You have like A, B, C, D, E, F, like it's quadrants. You have northwest, northeast, southwest. So it's just like, where things are, even just based off like the address.
Mm-hmm.
And probably having the military background, being forced to learn how to terrain associate with certain things, like I just look at them differently, maybe.
Yeah.
That's super cool.
So right now, can all of you point north?
Yeah.
That one.
Yeah, I think that's
It takes me a second.
It took me a second, actually. No, MJ, I'm the same way. Like sometimes in DC, I felt like this shame about being a geographer, because a lot of times I would be kind of lost. And I was like, why is it that DC is the one city that I never like really knew which direction was which? And I realized it was the metro. Like I had like started living here, taking the metro, and I didn't really pay attention to the map. I was more like listening to names, and the metro in DC, like especially if you're on the red line, it does this kind of, this U. And so you get turned around all the way, basically, by the time you could start going one direction and then you're going the other direction when you get off in another stop. And I felt this like deep shame. People be like, aren't you a geographer? Why don't you know where we are? And it was interesting because DC is like the only place that I've ever felt that. And I realized that like my spatial awareness is so much of a feeling and a perceptive thing. Like I'm an ENFP, and I realized that was the spatial nature of me, is that I'm always kind of assessing myself compared to other people, or I'm always feeling like the directions that I turned, like it's this feeling for me more than like a fact, which is, you know, cardinal directions are like less what mattered to me, and it was more of like my own space in the world and my own movement, which is weird because I realized, especially being a product manager, that I see data and maps like very differently than other geographers. I'm a little bit less mathematical, even though I loved math growing up, but I'm a little bit less mathematical and like analytical than a lot of people in this field. And I'm more perceptive, and like into like intuition is bigger for me, which is just, it's interesting because
When you look at a map, do you immediately have a sense of how you, like where you, like when you're sitting looking at a map, do you have a sense of like where you're sitting relative to that map at all times?
I always turn the map, which is something I realized no one really does except for me. I always turn it. I turn it like to be my reality, which is like really weird. I didn't realize that like no one else did that.
Rachel.
I do the same thing.
Okay. Yeah. I can't like readjust my world. I like make the map fit me.
Depending on the situation, right? If it's, you know, going to the local coffee shop, I won't need to. But if it's in the middle of the wilderness, I have to like.
I turn it. Yeah.
It's the way to move.
Interesting. Yeah, I remember reading. It's like probably back in my undergrad about. I think it was like a somewhere in Oceania, this like Aboriginal tribe that they didn't use right or left denotions. At all times, they would use like cardinal direction denotions. So they'd be like, can you pass that with your north hand really quick? And like at all times, they're so keenly tuned in to like how they're positioned that like that's how they relate to the world. So to like talk about like just like a language and how you see reality, I think it's pretty interesting the way different people like turning a map that's really curious to me. Is the metro does it go underground? Oh yeah, so like that's
orienting.
You like get in like facing a certain direction and you get out and like you've been twisted and turned with absolutely no sense of context. So yeah, that also sounds like a fun challenge to try to like pop back out,
reorient,
and be like.
Now I can do it, but it took me a while.
Yeah, that's pretty fun.
So I had a question or thought.
It's so stupid, but I was just laughing at myself because when Rachel was talking about how she orients a map to be kind of like her reality. First of all, Rachel, I saw that happen a million times just knowing you, but specifically in Europe. Rachel would lead us around Europe, and she was really good at it, but she was always moving the map. And I was like, Rachel, because I'd like hold up. I'm like, Rachel, I have it, and she'd like twist it around, and just. I'm like, what are you doing?
That's so true.
But I think what both helped but also hindered me growing up is growing up in Colorado, because the mountains were always west, and same thing. I always oriented myself in a certain way where the mountains were always west. So anytime I go anywhere in my head, mountains are always west, which here actually also works, which is great. It's like other places in the world it does not work. That was my really silly thought that Will wanted me to share. But
no, I mean it's super valid that like when you have natural landmarks that are so prevalent. I mean, Snow King, I can look at a ski hill right now, and that's south. I know that. That's like the one thing you can see out of our house. Or if you're around town, certain buttes are like directly east, directly west, whatever. It makes it really easy to know which way you're facing at all times. But being in like Chicago or DC, I don't know if there are like any natural landmarks beyond like, is there a river or water?
The Washington Monument is probably the only thing you're really going to see.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, which kind of works, right?
I'd just be so turned around all the time. Even in Eugene, I was like, there's really nothing that like orients me in the right direction, which is just a flat land. I'd have no idea where I was.
So Connor, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Traveling somewhere you've never been before, do you spend a lot of time looking at the map before you go like, all right, this is where I'm staying, like this is where I want to go to do this is where I want to see this, and like just basically memorizing the map before you even visit that place and have an understanding of where things are?
Yeah, I spend an inordinate amount of time. So like this should also be, I'm not terribly drawn to like I'm not a city person. I'm not really, when I get excited about like future trips, they're not usually culturally driven. They're more outdoors, recreation, and like landscape driven. So that's a little different. I'm not sure I would put as much time, because part of it's also like, it's not like dependent, like to a certain extent you wouldn't be able to like accomplish your goal in the outdoors, or you'd be at risk in the outdoors if you didn't put enough time in. I definitely put like too much time in, but
I mean, kind of your honeymoon in Japan is a perfect example. It's an extremely cultural experience, but you're going to ski. Like,
yeah, and I can tell you that I've already looked at a ton of maps and like, but I'm not looking at like the cities by any means. Actually, that's probably a good answer for you. Is like I haven't looked at a map of any of these cities at all yet, and I'm using Google to figure out like timing between like for trains and things like that to like get to a destination, and then it's like, okay, I zoom out, and this is honestly the perfect segue. So here, I'm gonna share my screen again.
Connor's gonna get lost on the way to like the sushi shop in Tokyo, but he'll hit that couloir no problem.
So how can I make this go?
Get lost on the way to the sushi shop.
So this might give you an idea, at least of like, for example, let's say, like I have a project going on right now to try to be the first person to ski every single peak in Nevada with over 3,000 feet of prominence. And there's like 64 of these peaks. I've skied like 12 of them so far. But there's a lot of work to be done. So I'm constantly like mapping out where to go next. And like, just to give you a sense of like, and this is the other pillar I kind of want to talk about with mapping is, and I'm sure Rachel and Kate are probably pretty familiar with this notion that there is like an insane amount of information out there that is like free and relatively easy to use, and just like very few people bother to leverage, even if they know about it, and even like it seems like barely any more people even know that it exists. So like, just to give you, this is all like, I guess except for the very last thing, this is all like free to use, like just out there, data being curated all the time. So like, first thing I do is pull up like a snow depth map from NOAA, and like I'm looking out in the desert, and I'm looking at like certain areas, right? Like, okay, for example, here is Mount Augusta. It's on my list. I want to ski it. Like, is there enough snow to ski that? Like, I don't know, 20 to 30 inches? Like, might be. It's pretty sparse, no snow down low, but we can figure that out later. And then I move this thing out of the way. And then I used the like classic NOAA weather map to get an idea of like, it's gonna be great this weekend. Like, weather's not a problem. Next up, like I pull up Google Maps, and I always use Google Maps side by side with CalTopo, another, again, totally free service. So like with Google Maps, you don't even need to go to Google Earth to get like the 3D effect, right? You can start to understand and break down like, okay, what does this terrain look like? How thickly forested are these slopes? You can even get an idea, especially with this imagery, like when there is snow, where does snow tend to hang out? Like, clearly these north-facing slopes, but like where in particular does it seem like these little gullies and faces hold snow the best? pull up Caltopo, and I could do an entire talk just about Caltopo alone. But this allows you to like, again, add and save and, you know, do all like blah, 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 blah. Oh my gosh, okay. Like, let's look at all like the statistics related to that line I just drew. Like, and all this information is like totally free. Honestly, pretty easy to like pick up once you get the hang of it. And then cool stuff like, here's a satellite image that's pretty high res that was taken like 4 days ago. And so like I can see like exactly where there's still snow lingering on the landscape if I'm going to go ski this thing. And then it's like, okay, well, I map out my route. It looks like the easiest way might be to go up this big broad canyon here north of the peak, and then to like come up one of these lower angle ridges. Well, let's see if that, like, if there's anything that would get in my way of doing it. Well, here's like a public land, like parcel map. Like, oh, it turns out right at the foot of that canyon, there's this private property owned by these people. Looks like we're gonna have to make sure to go around that. Don't want to be trespassing. And this, so like, this is something I do all the time for like any given peak, any given, you know, in the summer it's about trail running, and the fall it's like, I spend a ton of time mapping because it's all about habitat related to hunting and the different species and things like that.
Kind of most importantly, why do Payne, Jack, and whatever their name was have property all the way out there? Oh my gosh.
Right? Yeah. So there's like tons of fascinating things. Like, look at, so if I zoom out, all this yellow is BLM land, right? That's like crazy. If I just click on it, I can get, we're talking 1.8 million continuous acres of BLM land out here.
What's BLM?
Bureau of Land Management. So they're actually the Bureau of Land Management, theoretically it's our land because our taxes pay for it, but they manage the most land of any single entity in the United States. And to give you an idea of how much, I'm not even sure it'll show you at this scale, but let's see. Yeah, all that yellow in Nevada, that is all BLM managed land. All this dark green is Forest Service. Nevada is also kind of a unique state in that I think it might be over 90% of the land is managed by the federal government. Like even these like.
Which Connor, give Lisa an idea for when it comes to BLM like rules, like how that differs for this Forest Service. Like when you look at this and you see yellow, you're like, are you like, oh, awesome, I'm good to go? Or like,
when you see yellow, it's like anything goes. Like, I'm not even kidding. Like what you can do that is totally legal on BLM land is pretty common. You have to, if you're camping, you have to pack up and move on after 14 days of being in the same spot. So like, all right, and then you can literally move like 100 yards and set camp up again for another 2 weeks. These hashed areas, this happens to be a wilderness study area, which isn't quite a wilderness area, but wilderness areas in general are much more strict. Like the total opposite really of BLM. And there, as you can see, these areas are couched within protected lands or managed lands. And wilderness areas like, there's a ton of wilderness area around Wyoming, around Jacksonville. And in wilderness areas, you can't use any kind of mechanized equipment whatsoever, including like, that's where you, not on a mountain bike, because the wheel and the drivetrain is considered a mechanized piece of equipment. Trail crews that work on trails in these areas can't use wheelbarrows because the wheel is considered a mechanized piece of equipment. You can't, like, there's no drone flying, there's none of that. You're not, when they have to like clear down trees off trails, they have to use the old school like 2-person saws because a chainsaw is considered a mechanized piece of equipment. So you go from like, literally you can rally your RV, like you don't even need to stay on this road. If you wanted to drive out here, you could do it. And you could just like set up camp and take your whole armory of weapons and fire guns into the mountain. Like literally anything goes. And then once you get back here, it's like the complete opposite. So understanding like that land distribution across the United States, and that's another kind of intersection of like data availability and like something that's just drawn on a map that's going to affect your reality, right? Like you're not supposed to walk across this person's property, and knowing where that is and knowing that like you can ride an ATV up this canyon, but you can't go any further south or else like you're going to be violating the law. Like these are all like, once you're out there, right, it's just, you wouldn't be able to tell that. These are like fictions that we put onto a screen or a page that we then abide by, right? And that we treat the land differently based off of this like human data that we have in many ways made up, which I think is pretty fascinating. And parcels, right? Like private parcels like these are like the ultimate example of that, where like this person's land, right, versus like our universal land. It's like a pretty fascinating thing to kind of consider like on a philosophical level, that we have drawn these imaginary boundaries and we will act in a very different way about this boundary than we would if it wasn't there. But yeah, and talk about like stories too, like how in the heck is this back here? Well, just from the Caltopo map, I happen to know it's an old town called Clan Alpine, which like almost everything in Nevada, I'm sure this was an old ranch or an old mining town. So they probably like mined the bejesus out of these hills, and someone held on to that land long enough that when they came around and actually designated the land federal land, that they were able to grandfather in these big pockets. But yeah, I was actually interested in these people before because I started seeing their name everywhere, and they've got like, what is this? 160 acres, 240 acres, 168, like these people own a ton of land.
It's also family, but they all live on different plots of the.
Well, so it's probably one person, and I think that this couple, like their main ranch, looks like it's probably right here. Although actually that's probably like their property that they, somewhere in here I found an actual like, it looked like a nice.
The equivalent of people doing Wikipedia wormholes.
Yeah, basically, yeah. If I do that with, yeah, so if I had to guess, this is their like actual house. And these people own so much land, they probably lease an immense amount of this land for cattle ranching. So I'm sure these are all outbuildings and work buildings, and they probably have people that live on site to do all the ranching and the wrangling and all that. But essentially they have their own little like fiefdom back here, where this is theoretically public land, and there's nothing stopping us from driving this road. And I'm sure that I will do this someday, right? Like walk around that property and go up that canyon, totally legal. But there are a lot of situations in which people essentially, by the boundaries of their private land, have, here we go, this is a great example, they've locked off public land. So talk about another like story, like another map story for you. So this is called checkerboarding, and it's found all over the West. And this is a remnant of a very stupid decision way back in the day when the railroad was being built west, and the government wanted to incentivize the railroad to be built as fast as possible. The old like manifest destiny period of time. And to do so within a certain buffer of where they expected the railroad to go. So this is actually where modern day Route 80 goes right here. So you can see, I mean, we can just measure this really quick. 17, 18 miles. I bet it's probably something like 20 miles on either side of where the railroad was to be put. They subdivided the land like this, and they sold every other block to the railroad. So the railroad could go in and they could take all the lumber they need, take all the minerals and all the other natural resources they need to actually build the railroad as they go. And then every other block would remain federal land. And they thought that what was going to happen was the railroad was going to be such an economic boon that the federal government would then be able to sell all these other blocks off to people at a really high rate because they're near the railroad. And they literally did this like all across the West. And it is hard to impress upon you how much land we're talking about. And, but now you have these wild situations where you go in here and Sea Punch Ranch, right? These folks here, they own all this land interspersed with land that is ours, right? All of ours, this public land, this BLM land. But most of this, if not all of this land, we cannot legally access because we would be having to cross private land in order to get to. And this is a huge issue and something that I've always thought I could like imagine like a different route in my academic career where I could imagine like studying like land access and public land use and access in this regard. I think is pretty fascinating. Nevada has a ton of it. Wyoming actually has the unfortunate circumstance of being the state with the most landlocked public land of any state. There is something like, look at that. There's something like 9 million acres of land in Wyoming that cannot be legally accessed by the general public. And like, it's our land, right? But we live in a country where individual rights trump those of the greater public. So the idea that like there should be an easement that we can walk through someone's private property to get to that public land is like, is not treated well in these places.
What's extra frustrating is that where you are right now, that is the middle of nowhere, right? That is like, yeah, it's the boonies. And so to be walking across somebody else's property out there, like it's a bummer that you have to like even think about that because you'd be walking through sagebrush for 1,000 miles, whatever it is, like going in and out of public and private land, and no one would ever even know, but you have to like deal with that.
Yeah, absolutely. And like, look at this here. This is a little more stark for you, Will. These huge islands of public land that are just surrounded by, I bet they're all the same owner too. Paradise Ranch, K Triangle, Paradise, right? Like it's pretty classic. And these landowners fight hard to keep it this way because they essentially, some of these landowners have like 2, 3 in order of magnitude times the amount of land, like including public as they do just on their private land that only they have access to, and they're not paying taxes on those lands, but they get to use them to like their heart's delight. It's a pretty wild issue, and something that really isn't like discussed at all. It's one of those things that like when you find out about it, it kind of seems like, how are we not talking about this all the time? Like this is our land and then we can't even access it. But it's just, and it's a reality all over the West, especially.
Rachel, do you know if is that an issue internationally? Like when you were in Africa, was that a thing that was
in one of the geospatial products that I work on called Earth Pulse, we're basically deriving like sets of metrics from like free and publicly available data sets. And one of our partners that we work with is American Prairie Reserve, and a lot of their lands are this weird, I was always like, why are these weird shapes? Like all these like American land polygons were so strange compared to internationally. It like makes sense. It goes along rivers. I'd say like internationally it makes a lot more sense than the US. It's not so like straight lines and these clearly like government derived land parcel divisions. I don't know. It's just so interesting.
Yeah.
Do you think there's
Prairie Foundation? That's what it is.
Yeah.
Do you think there's any benefit to it in the sense of it not being? Do you think if the government were able to get its hands on it, we could you know, that there be infrastructure built and the land just be used for development? Do you think there's like a silver lining to it?
I would say no. I mean, there's always the fear of a malicious government, or like an extractive-minded government like we have now, taking advantage of these things. But the reality is, public or private land is not going to stand in their way, because all they need to do is approach these folks and, hey, how much do you want for us to mine the crap out of your land? And they'll gladly take the money. And then in many cases, if you have a noble land owner who's going to stand up to that, for a lot of resource extraction, they'll just push eminent domain style just land seizures and be like, well, it's for the greater good for us to take this land for resource extraction. I think that it would be better in control of the government than it would be otherwise. Or like Rachel's brought up, the American Prairie Reserve is a really interesting group. It's actually a bunch of Germans, right?
Yeah, Scandinavians, I think, or something. Yeah. Which
is really funny that I feel like that's another great map story, is that these are folks. You ever seen like the memes or whatever of like a bunch of African tribesmen sitting in a circle, and the meme says something like talking about how to divvy up Alaska, right? And it's kind of like, yeah, like us like white Westerners are really kind of assholes, like just going into these places and telling people like how to manage their land, and like drawing lines on maps that's their land where they live, and telling now it's gonna be managed this way. And the American Prairie Foundation, what I think is funny about them, I like them because I like their mission, which is essentially to try to connect as much of this public land as possible and create a massive reserve where they're going to reintroduce wolves. They are working on, they may have already reintroduced them, but they're like going to build up this bison population, right? And try to like bring wild bison back to the prairie. It's a really cool project. But what I like, something I like about it is that it's a bunch of foreigners coming in and like buying up American land, and like they have this idea of like, wouldn't it be cooler if instead of people like just destroying their land over there, if we bought it up and like made it something beautiful? And it's like something that we've done other places, and now we're having it done to ourselves. And it's I feel like there's some like social justice in there somewhere. But yeah, no, that's a pretty
controversial in that area too. I mean, Sean Garrity is the CEO, and I've met him, and like it's funny. Like I think now it's mostly Americans who are on the staff, but I know that it's so controversial in Montana. Yeah. They're trying to recreate like the American Serengeti, essentially, is what they call it.
Yeah. And I mean, I think it can be super cool, and it's right above like Missouri River Breaks area. This part of the state there's a lot of like quote unquote nothing out here in general, but like the Missouri River Breaks are like an absolutely here, like it's like something out of like right, like it's out of a novel, like very incredible idyllic landscapes. Like you can take your canoe and paddle the Missouri River through what feels like a timeless part of the American West. And there's bighorn sheep and mountain goats and bear, and it's stunning landscape. And so I think like right on to them, you know? Like if we're not going to do it, like if our landowners out there are, the reality is they're all like very, you know, right-leaning and pretty hardcore in their feelings about government and any kind of regulation and anything that you say the word environment and they're like, and I think that if the old-fashioned just buy it up and do with it what you will because it's private land now, like if that's the way to go, I'm on board.
Kind of a bit of a tangent, but how, like, what are the geographers in the group thoughts on like privacy? So just yesterday we watched Westworld. Watch Westworld, and this is kind of like we went down a rabbit hole where it's like J.J. Abrams produces it, right? And then what else does he produce? Oh, the Star Wars movies. Harrison Ford's a local. I was like, where does Harrison Ford live? I literally type in, where does Harrison Ford Ranch, Jackson or something like that, and it's like it pulls it up. Like it's just down the street from us, pretty much. It's pretty crazy. It was.
Could you direct me to it?
Like, what was that?
Could you direct me to it?
Yeah, I mean, without a doubt. And so it's pretty incredible that like you can just search someone's name and then it shows like the families around him who are also like celebrities or have like, a ton of, and you can just like click on their name and where their house is. So so the Jackson Hole Hereford Ranch down there to the left, head that way. And so you're gonna see Three Creek Ranch Club. Yeah, zoom in there. Right? I mean, we can see Harrison Ford's house. Okay, so it is to the left. It's out by like Carifa and James, George, and Karen. It's out there.
It's probably name withheld at owner's request.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, I think that might be the exact spot. He has 800 acres.
Oh my.
Which I think that might be him right there.
That's 43 plus, that's 100 acres. I bet this.
Yeah, I can't remember exactly which one it is in there, but it's
the name of his show.
That area.
Yeah, I know. I was going to say one of these, there's got to be like a Millennial Falcon LLC or something like that.
Yeah.
But so what are your thoughts on that? Because I know in our Oregon geography program, Professor Bo and Rachel, I remember one of the amazing things I remember from that class was how people who do street view, they drive around to all these houses and they have their cameras going, and that people would say, hey, I'm a private residence. You can't have imagery of my house. But so they go to sue Google. And by inputting the paperwork, you have to put your address down and it immediately dequalifies you to fight Google because you are saying you want to be private, but by suing them, you're giving up your address and therefore going public with it yourself. And so Google can't lose that. Or that was his like little blurb about it. It was pretty interesting.
I think that there are just general legal hurdles there, like any photo taken from like a legal private or public area, like if you're walking in a park and someone takes your photo, like you have no legal recourse to stop them from taking that photo, or like
but an imagery onto a private property though,
but it's taken from public
property.
They're not trespassing. And
yeah,
if they were
like driving back into it, right?
And there'd be some limit if they were to like, be like zooming into your windows or something like that. But other than that, like, yeah, they are very much like in their legal right to do so. Of course, like whether that should be allowed is another thing.
Yeah, and that's what I'm curious about. Like, okay, with the city, you guys hear that kind of thing? Do you like hear from people like, hey, I saw you guys are working on this project, or anything that has to do with the privacy? Because that to me is like, I've never felt like intruded upon or like even worried about that at all. Like I don't care, but it's an interesting mindset for people.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it comes in a lot of different ways in my work. Like, one thing I occasionally do, I don't do it as much as some of my coworkers, is like actually go out in the field and like GPS the locations of certain assets. And we get a lot of pushback from that sometimes. Like Jesse, my boyfriend, who I also work with, who couldn't join us tonight, but he was like out the other day because even though we're on lockdown, he was like, I'm not actually gonna be within 6 feet of anybody. Like, I'm just gonna be like GPSing some manholes. But like, this guy got really angry. Like, why are you even near my property? And with COVID, it makes everything a lot more sensitive. But even before that, people are like, well, like, why didn't you let me know that you were going to be near my house? Like, what is that instrument that you have? It is kind of weird looking, I guess, like a GPS unit. But I also get it to some extent, or like, especially with certain things. Like, I've worked a lot with census data, and I do think it is really important to protect people's identities in that regard, like to like aggregate census data by block group and by census tract. Like a bunch of people recently at the city were requesting, like, where are the households where people of color are living? Like, we want data on, like, where are the Latino neighborhoods in Boulder, and it's for a good cause. It's like, there is a lot of inequality in our community because we're so heavily white, basically. And there is a lot of income disparity, essentially. So people at the city are really trying to make sure that there's equal distribution of services and access. But the census doesn't give you that information. Like, you can't be like, this household has like these people living in it. And I think that that's important to protect people's identity in that way. And it is frustrating that, especially now that we're like waiting for the 2020 census to come out, like we don't have good information on where people are living. Like, we just have these like estimates basically at this point since the 2010 census. But yeah, so it becomes frustrating that like we don't have very specific information, but at the same time, I do think it is important to give people privacy in that regard. But then talking about Google Street View, like, I didn't know this, but I was perusing on there the other day, and somebody like had their whole entire house blocked out. Like, you know how people's faces are blocked out on Street View? Like somebody achieved like getting their entire house like blurred out on Street View. So I don't know how you do that, but apparently you can.
That's interesting. That the Street View, I think, is kind of funny because at the end of the day, you can just drive your car down that street and look for yourself, and you'll see it in the higher res, full vision, and from every single possible angle you can. So I think it just feels creepy because it's like something we're not used to being able to do. Mm-hmm. But like, to that extent, like, it's pretty easy to figure it, like, to do yourself. Like, that person, their house blurred out, it's kind of funny because you could just like drive down the neighborhood and look at it for yourself.
I know.
Yeah. Not really sure what that's like achieving. If anything, it makes me think like, I should go check out that house. What's going on with that house?
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah, but like the personal level data that we hand out every day, spatial related or not, is definitely interesting. One of the so my thesis project for my master's at Montana was wildlife related, but the project, I was on a separate research project as a research assistant that actually like paid for my degree, and that project was in like, the gist of it was in Pennsylvania, like 2/3 of Pennsylvania, to help clean up the Chesapeake Bay. They're trying to, a couple different like conservation approaches they have, and one of them is called riparian buffer restoration. And the riparian area is the area immediately adjacent to a creek or river. It's the land that basically touches the river. General idea is when you have healthier, better treed, more vegetated land against rivers, you have less erosion, you have a lot of pollution being caught and safely held in the vegetation rather than into the water, blah, blah, blah. Downstream, the Chesapeake Bay gets healthier. So in an area like Pennsylvania, where the vast majority of the land is private, we were trying to find people that had land that was twofold. They had land that actually touched a waterway and was degraded, like it wasn't forested or shrub. And then also the second part of it, which was the creepy part, kind of, was that it's surprisingly easy to just pay for big consumer data. And we had data on everyone in the area that we were interested in, which is 2/3 of Pennsylvania, like what magazines they like to read, and like and this data, if you use a credit card, your data is out there right now. Like, because in the small text that no one ever bothers to read, it's like you're giving away, every time you swipe your card, you're like giving permission to somebody to sell that data. And that's how places like, that's how things like Facebook, Google, that's how they really make money, is the ads are, like for Google, ads are obviously a big part of it, but increasingly they're making money on selling your data. Like, have you any of you read the New York Times articles recently about comparing like counties and how well different counties responded to COVID and how quickly it took them to reduce travel time? And all that data is literally from Google. It's like using your phone, even when you're not running your phone in a GPS mode, like your phone is tracking where you're going, and they can sell that data to people, like literally to know where you've been. In fact, like you should all go on and Google Maps timeline, and it will show you on a day-by-day basis where you've gone. And it'll probably freak you out a little bit. You'll be like, hold up, I didn't realize I was like recording that, and you weren't. Like, you just had your phone in your pocket. Yeah. Oh, it's so creepy. You turn it on, and it's just like a point for every place you've ever been. And then you can like just click. Do you see that today button?
Mine automatically took me to a page that is prompting me to delete all my location history. That was like the top hit on Google, was like, it just redirects me to a delete.
That's what mine's doing. Yeah.
Really?
Mine's still loading, but
I think it's like, Rachel, what kind of phone do you have?
Yeah, I have an iPhone. Do you?
Yeah, I do too. Like, I wonder, do you guys have Android? Because it's like the next link is like Android specific. So maybe Google is partnered with Android on that. Like, I wonder if, because I remember actually after I went to Iceland, like looking at, I could like dive in this really like weird backlog of my phone, and like that's where the info was, and it could show me like every single place I'd been in Iceland, even though I was on airplane mode the entire time I was there. So yeah. Basically what I'm saying is, I wonder if iPhone and Android do it differently, and maybe they don't both partner with Google on it. I don't know.
No, I mean, I have like an LG phone, and I just pulled it up, and honestly, kind of sad how little I've traveled apparently. That was my big takeaway is I've been to Jackson, Colorado, and apparently Maui recently.
but Will, is there a button for today?
Yeah, try today.
Let me pull that back up.
Click on it.
When you hit today, you can start going day by day back through your history, and it will draw a line on the map and show you where you've been. It's pretty crazy. And sometimes it's like a little course, right? Like pretty straight lines, like you went to the grocery store and back. But sometimes
I have no history today.
Yeah, the quarantine is kind of funny because it's like a lot of days it just shows my house.
So
Mine's saying
it's not giving me anything.
Yeah, like I have no history, so maybe I have something turned off. Like if I go back to January, it just takes me to like the middle of the ocean.
Yeah, exactly. Same here.
Interesting.
And it even has, so it has one place in Italy that I used to go a bunch because we lived above it, but then it has a restaurant that I've never even been to, so I don't know.
Kind of.
Clearly, your privacy settings are not that good, Connor.
All of us have taken the precautions.
Like the man's watching us, Big Brother. No, you just needed to click decline.
Connor, how sad is this? My house giver. My house and work.
2020.
The only places I've been.
In all of 2020.
Yeah, right now everything's
Thanks.
going with places I checked into.
That's pretty funny. Yeah, but like when you're on Google Maps and you're like, it's giving you like a time estimate to your destination, like it builds those estimates in off of every other Google user on the road at that time. Even if they're not running the app, it will tell you. That's how it crowdsources the data.
I saw a really interesting thing about a guy who just took a bunch of phones to like a bridge.
Put him in the wagon.
To like, to like create traffic, and then it showed up as like having really heavy traffic in that area because he had all these phones. It's just like hundreds of phones. I don't know how he got them.
And it's like a dude walking around like a neighborhood with like 100 iPhones in a little red wagon.
Yeah, and it was like noticeable.
Wait, what?
The data has people being rerouted to other places because of the heavy traffic.
Kind of. My next question was actually.
They love my land.
my next question was going to be like, I mean, for I guess all of you guys, that like, what are the coolest projects going on that are like kind of the future of mapping that you know of? Like, is there somebody that you know out there who's like doing this incredible research, or like Rachel, is there like a project happening in Nat Geo that's like mind blowing? The wagon thing is the opposite, of course, but.
Oh my gosh, it's amazing.
like
like
way too much time on their hands and way too much money.
Like Rachel, at Nat Geo, is there some project that you're like, wow, it'd be so cool to be part of that specific one?
Yeah, I mean, I work with this guy, Steve Brumby, and I just think like he's amazing. He founded Descartes Labs, if you've ever heard of that. So how they started was they basically beat the USDA on crop yield predictions. So Steve and a few other guys in New Mexico, they were from Los Alamos Labs. They just took all this freely available satellite imagery, and they, like you were saying, Connor, they're like, clearly you can derive insights from these things that people don't realize you can do. And they beat the government, and the government was like, oh, we'd love that. So they sold it, and that was kind of the beginning of Descartes Labs. So now Steve is with us, and he's trying to do essentially the same thing. He's saying, like, the product that he started, which we call Earth Pulse, is basically just taking tons of freely available data and deriving metrics for it. It's really similar to Bloomberg, like how the overall vision for the product was, how do you make the Bloomberg terminal for the planet? So how do you derive indices, trends?
I'm not sure I know what the Bloomberg tunnel was it?
The Bloomberg terminal is a financial term. So the Bloomberg terminal basically helps people monitor their investments in the financial market, and using a bunch of different data. So, from like sentiment data, sentiment, like what is this country, what's happening in this country? It's political, it's, geography, it's conflict, what conflict is going on in the world, like, and how does all of those different factors affect your financial investments? And it's the idea is that you're trying to tend towards being more predictive. I guess all of that to say is that sometimes I think all this like big data really makes me super nervous. I love the idea of how do you, a lot of where the environmental markets are going, like it is, how do you commodify nature in a way that helps nature itself? So how do you put a price on mangroves protecting your country from flooding? Like, what is that protection? How does your country value that kind of risk protection versus paying for, whatever happens after the flood already happens, like paying for the damage? So they're trying to move towards being more proactive rather than responsive. But I think it's such a slippery slope. So sometimes I feel like a little bit nervous because I see the power of all these things, but also like commodifying nature to me feels very weird. So I feel like, I think there's so much cool things going on. Everyone's trying to do this right now. It's like an arms race. Like right now, we're working with Google to do this dynamically updating land use land cover 10-meter resolution map of the world that will update quarterly, which is like unheard of, because the thing is, like, one of the problem with most of the data sets is that the land use maps are like every couple years, and by the time, you know, so it's just outdated data. So we're working with Google on that, but I don't know, I mean, sometimes it's a slippery slope, so I have mixed feelings about all of it, honestly.
And like slippery slope in what way? What kind of conversations do you hear that you're like, yeah, I don't know how I feel about that?
Like, for instance, we're with Earth Pulse, we're partnering with UNDP, and so we're helping countries set environmental targets for CBD, which was supposed to be in China. It's like the Council for Biological Diversity was supposed to be in China this year in October, which it's probably not going to happen anymore. But countries are needing a way to kind of set these environmental targets. And at CBD, they're going to set international targets for the world. Like, most countries are probably going to agree that, you know, they're going to try and protect 30% of the planet by 2030 in some form of protected state. And so every country has to like set their own goals to meet that. Some countries are going to want to go over, like Costa Rica is really, you know, kind of shooting above and beyond, countries that have more biodiversity than others. So anyways, yeah, I just think one of the countries that we were going to work with was China. And I just started thinking, like, this is such a powerful tool to derive all these insights so quickly that I just can't help but think that it'd be just as easy to exploit the resources, like just as easy having all these insights. So I suppose people are already doing that right now. That's the argument, is like, you could do that right now. And people are, but I don't know, it seems like we're just making it easier sometimes, but.
Yeah, the pitting a price on something that's otherwise priceless is a very troubling thing. I agree, because the problem with pitting people always frame it like, well, it's a way to generate funding or to be able to compare it to something that otherwise it wouldn't be able to be compared to. But I think that you so easily run the risk of, the second you put a price on something, people are going to be willing to pay that price. And the classic example is like 10 black rhinos like remaining in the world, and like, should we accept that if someone's willing to pay $5 million to kill one, to hunt one, that like, and all that money was to go towards black rhino conservation, like, is that all right? Like, those, like, because like the second you put a price on it, someone's going to be like, yeah, I'll do it. Like, someone's going to pay that. So how do you avoid, like, I think that there are just inherently things in the world that like should never like have a dollar sign associated with it. Yeah. Wow. At some point I want to hear more about that 10-meter data set. That's pretty fascinating.
Yeah.
I'm assuming that's leveraging their Earth engine and whatnot.
Yeah, we run Earth Pulse fully on Earth Engine. Dynamic World is, using their machine learning team. Is doing a bunch of work with. We have like 5,000 photo annotators doing, essentially running through all these different photos and annotating land cover and land use. And then we're also going to use machine learning to test and make sure that their annotations are correct. It's like using the model on itself to ground truth it.
Are you had a meeting with Jeff, right?
Yeah, Jeff. Oh my gosh. So we were working with Esri for a little bit, and that's where Jeff got involved. I feel so bad because that was just like a complete train wreck. Because our relationship with Esri is just...
Doesn't surprise me.
It wasn't his fault. It was not his fault. It was like, our relationship with Esri is interesting, but I just felt so bad. I need to text Jeff and be like, how are you doing?
Oh, I'm sure he's fine.
Yeah, he's doing great.
Jeff was he was my direct supervisor when I worked at the Conservancy in Maryland.
Oh, such a good guy.
Funny. Yeah, interesting guy. Yeah, but there's super cool data being made. The classic way to like innovate right now is just to create higher resolution data across a larger landscape and somehow store it in a more efficient manner. So, and like the amount of data you can go on download right now is like silly. And like, are you familiar with LiDAR, Will? This is kind of old news at this point, but
I mean, we learned about it in the geography program.
yeah.
I don't remember it like really thoroughly, but I remember it like the basic, I think, concept.
Yeah, like a plane or now a drone, right? Flies over and like shoots a laser a million times a minute or whatever, and every single laser pulse bounces back, and they're able to measure the exact time between sending of the pulse and the return, so they're able to understand exactly where it connected with something in real space, and then map that out in a three-dimensional environment. So that's like super powerful, and that is now like the coverage of LiDAR is always getting better and better and better, and the resolution is getting better and better. And of course, what I've been told is that like the resolution you're able to download off like online, like the military has like an order of magnitude better than that. So like that is out there. That's like, it's cool, but it's also a little more straight, just like brute force, like more data is always the answer is kind of, I don't know. It's cool, but it's also kind of like not super innovative at this point because it's been the trend for like the whole discipline, I think, for a long time. It's just more better data. Like companies like Planet that are launching, like, how many drones do they have in the sky, or satellites do they have now? Like 300 something?
Oh yeah, they have, and they're starting to do those toaster satellites where it's like the size of a toaster, like micro constellations or whatever they're called.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like the micro constellations, and they're like, I think Planet's goal is to like image the entire Earth, daily satellite imagery, products, planet monitoring, 140 plus satellites in orbit. Scan the globe, imaging the entirety of the Earth's landmass every day.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
I'm curious at what looks to be a pretty darn good resolution too.
I think it's 30 centimeters is because we bought like $100,000 worth of tasking so we could task the satellites to go where we wanted, but it was 30 centimeters, which I was like, oh, that's great resolution. That's the best I've ever heard of. But when you think about 30 centimeters, like the things we were trying to see, or not 30 centimeters, 30, is that right? 300.
Well, what I'm seeing now is their SkySat program image any location up to twice a day at 72 centimeter resolution.
Okay, yeah.
In 5-band image, which is crazy. That's insane.
Mike and Lisa, did you guys see any of that stuff when you were in the military? Was that like a part of your experience, seeing the data that Conor was talking about?
Yeah, I use LiDAR all the time. Amongst a lot of other types of, I can't remember, the HSI maybe, something like that, where you can see that, changes in the Earth, and you'd be able to tell if someone like put an ID. Yeah, put an ID. You'd scan in the morning, then you'd scan again at night. You could see the change in soil composition and stuff. I mean, it was all. Some of those were, we call them, fixed wing, platforms. A lot of them that were, space-based platforms as well. But yeah, like we would use LiDAR to like measure the slope angle of a mountain, as well as what a draw look like for a helicopter landing or something like that for an operation or something.
You missed me rolling my eyes at him earlier. I think his exact words were something along the lines of, "I was the first one."
Hey, what can I say? I was innovative, baby.
Yeah, I never
cutting edge.
I had courses on it where I saw the capabilities.
Mike's like flying the drone into like the woman's bag. Like, come on, Mike. Cut that out.
But yeah, I mean, if a toaster satellite could take an image daily of, whatever resolution that was, 72 centimeter, that's phenomenal.
It's insane.
Yeah. No, it is insane. On the academic side, there's always like really like wandering around any academic hall, like there's always cool spatial analysis things going on, but they're usually like so pigeonholed as to what they're analyzing, and a lot of it's very much like not very much of a management outcome related to it, but still cool stuff done. I think the more fascinating stuff is the intersection of like private corporation and nonprofits and everything, and like their management side of things, like why they want the data, with the statistical, rigorous, scientific stuff. I mean, there's so much being done right now. It's pretty mind blowing.
Connor, how come GMAP's pedometer is such a bad interface?
Do you still use that?
Yeah, I mean, I only when I do like a short run or something like that, I'm like, yeah, I'll see if that was a half mile or a mile I just ran. Either way, it's pretty sad. But then I go on there and it's just like, it's such a bad program.
Wasn't that around when the TomTom existed?
Yeah. Similar timing.
Original.
Oh yeah.
The original one.
Oh, I haven't used this in forever, Will. So,
but more along those lines is like the intro mapping that like it is so complex now, and you can have so much detail and so many layers and all these different things that like for someone like MJ, where she's like just doesn't have that background. Do you have certain websites or even just like, hey, look at a physical map? Do you have certain things like that you push people towards to kind of get into it? Because we have actually, Rachel got both of us the road atlas. I think it's the Nat Geo road atlas. Yeah. We both have it in cars, and like I love pulling it up like on a road trip, and it's like flipping through the pages and like looking at the different towns. Like, wow, he's passed through that place.
That's cool.
Like, is that kind of the best intro to people?
I mean, I think like even just spending time on Google Maps, not for the purpose of just mapping out directions or somewhere, but just even just like flying on Google and like looking at things and like let me share my screen again. Have you seen like the high res in a few areas, like Glacier, for example? They have like extra high res imagery. Have you seen this?
No.
It's insane. I mean,
yeah, they do 3D photogrammetry now. It's cool because if you use Earth Studio, it's even better. Like, yeah, it's so amazing. It's so amazing.
Like, look at that.
Oh yeah, I have seen that. I think mainly in like cities, but that's crazy.
Right? Like,
you're like, oh wow, like I'm hiking right now.
Isn't that nuts? When you go down to like a forested area, you let it load. It like renders individual trees.
Wow.
It's absolutely stunning. So like, and this is.
Do you think that this will be the entire world? You can view it this way in what, 5 years, kind of thing, or like how far are they from that?
Less than that.
Yeah.
Way less than that. It's just like right now, there's a lot of places that just aren't. They're just not getting enough attention because no one ever like they can. I'm sure they can track how frequently like a tile of data is viewed, and no point in them spending time and money like enhancing imagery that no one ever looks at.
Yeah.
So, like right now they have like the national parks, or some of the national parks. I mean, like, but look at that, right? That's absolutely stunning.
My
We're doing a
gosh.
lot of like 3D photogrammetry for protected areas and experimenting with using it for animal counting, using object detection, and
What?
it's pretty crazy. I'm gonna like try and bring up this deck to show you because it's really fucking cool what like all our fellows are doing.
Wait, so Rachel, like this kind of thing that Connor's showing us right now, that they look at that and they say, there's 50 bear in this valley. Like,
No, you wouldn't even say anything. The computer would just tell
Yeah.
you there's 50 bears in that valley.
Because you like train it, you like you have some parts of the image where you know that like there's a confirmed bear, and you basically like, okay, here's a bear, this is what it looks like, here's another
Exactly.
one, this is what they look like, and then the machine learning will process the rest of the image and be like, well, here are the rest of the bears for you.
Will, get this. Usually you have to go through, like Connor's saying, and annotate, like, and tell the computer, you're teaching the computer, like, this is what a bear looks like, because it's like a toddler, it doesn't know, right?
Mhm.
But now, this guy we work with, his name's Corey Duskowski, he is using synthetic data. Like, he can make a 3D model of a bear, render it in 1,000 different angles, teach the computer that that's what a bear looks like from 1,000 different angles, and then find the bear without
Oh my
ever
gosh.
seeing a real bear. He did this with warthogs. I want to try and present this deck. It's really fucking cool.
Machine Gun Kelly.
And the computer got it like 99%. He did it with, it had never seen a real warthog until it saw that warthog video. And it knew, like, warthog.
Will, have you ever seen the neural network paintings?
I don't think so.
Where like, this is a painting made by a computer. After it was fed information on like so for this one, for example, it like they work in a variety of ways, but it like Emma Thompson, it looks at all Google photos of Emma Thompson and it paints like a composite image of like what Emma Thompson looks like. So
yeah, so it's like in order. It's like, oh, this is Picasso painting, this is Gandalf, and this is them combined.
Yeah.
Or whoever.
Yeah, so it's like paint me Gandalf in Picasso style, and then it like it figures out what Gandalf looks like, and then it figures out how like what makes Picasso's style his style, and then it emulates it.
Give Rachel a share. I want to see this deck thing.
Oh, yeah.
Gosh, I've never. Oh, host disabled attendee screen sharing.
You should.
So Rachel, he made up this warthog in the 3D modeling thing. Because he made it, he can just take again an image of it from every angle, like even below, and then says, "This is what a warthog looks like." And that program says, okay, in this area of Texas, these are all the warthogs.
In the area that you have scanned at a certain resolution. So like you would have to be able to see the warthog from the imagery itself. It's not like going to be able to detect like pixels that are not viewable, but like if you were at a low enough height, which they do, there's an example with elephants. The warthog video isn't in this one.
You should be able to share your screen.
Share? Okay.
Yeah, so that's pretty freaking cool project. Very well.
Let's see it. Okay, so this was scanning. This is doing that like 3D photogrammetry of Everest. So this is base camp, and the idea is that, Corey scanned all of basically Everest so that you can essentially measure the height. Once they're going to rescan it in, however many years, then you can see the height, how it's changed, the snow packed. They put a weather station. Let me see. Let me get to the part where they're.
Awesome.
Okay, this is the project that I work on, conservation technology. Okay, so this is the elephants. So this is a 3D scan.
My screen didn't change.
Yeah, mine's currently Everest looking thing.
Yeah.
Oh shoot, dang it. Can you see that?
Yeah.
Okay, so there's the elephants, and just using object detection, you could theoretically find all the different animals in your park. We've done this in Garamba National Park in the DRC. We're working with Gorongosa more in Mozambique to do this too. So how do you kind of use machine learning for animal counting? I also work a lot with Earth Ranger, which is another cool geospatial product. So this is super different, but it's basically real-time object, real-time insights into where all of your different animals are. So all the different animals that are collared, you can use ranger radios to figure out where your patrol is in a protected area. There's a few different GIS and analysis tools built into those types of things. Dang, this isn't the cool deck. They're mapping all the coral. This is Earth Pulse that I work on as well. And yeah, they're just showing that they're labeling satellite imagery, trying to do, this is what Earth Pulse looks like. It's basically just bringing together all these different, freely available data sets. And we have these like widgets on the side that can give you insights about the polygon that you're looking at. So you can do it for a whole country and have essentially a dashboard of your country. There's fire activity, land use, land cover, protected areas, how much is protected, how much carbon are you storing, and you can do it all the way down to specific polygons too. This is not I don't have a more recent deck, but our engineers in the basement are working on this, where when an animal walks into the frame of a camera, then the camera can detect, that's a rhino, and it can send an alert to Earth Ranger. So this is they're prototyping this in Lewa in Kenya. These are all outdated slides, but yeah, it's pretty cool. There's a lot of like spatial stuff going on. Yeah.
That's fascinating.
That's pretty rad. Oh my God.
Kind of psyched.
Yeah, it's awesome stuff.
Happy.
I'm
gonna find that warthog video and send it to you.
Yeah, that's so cool.
I don't know where that is.
Is that stuff used predominantly for climate purposes and migration, or also like anti-poaching and stuff like that too? All of
Earth
it.
Ranger and that camera that you saw with the blue box around the rhino, that is supposed to be for anti-poaching. So they have one that detects, they're working on using, this is really cool. They're turning sound into pictures because the machine learning, all of the algorithms around photos are so much better than sound because Facebook and Google invested so much money in those algorithms, I guess. And so they're doing one they have a gunshot detection one that they're prototyping. They have that smart sensor camera, which detects animals and people. Yeah, those are the two kind of smart sensors that they're using.
Can you explain the sound into a picture? So like it hears a gunshot and it like.
I wish I had like the deck of this.
That.
So it puts it into like looks like a rainbow of the I don't know what I'm saying. Like the sound waves, I suppose, and like the colors designate some sort of I don't know.
I see. Okay.
And it makes this like photo. It's like a fingerprint. Like this, a sound is essentially a finger unique picture. And so if you train the computer on that information, then theoretically, if you convert the sound into a picture every time, then the computer can be like, oh, I know what this picture is. It's a gunshot. Sure. Versus they're doing, and they had to train it on what silence was. That was the crazy thing, is that it kept thinking a gunshot was going off because the computer didn't know what silence was. It only knew it knew what lightning was, it knew what all these other things were, but it was like, what's silence? You have to it's a 2-year-old, it doesn't know anything. You have to teach it all these things. It's really weird. So I've been hearing all their stories. I don't work on that project, but.
Like a savant 2-year-old.
Exactly, it's crazy. So,
yeah, computers are extremely good at being able to do a replicated procedure that requires essentially math that goes beyond the human limit, but you step outside that box and it
knows nothing.
Everything breaks.
It can't be intuitive. It will never.
Yeah, there's no intuition. It's pretty cool.
It's pretty cool, yeah.
So cool. And if you ever looking at topo maps, Will, always a good place to spend time, I think, to learn how to read maps. But if you ever want to like be humbled, next time you're looking at a topo map, think about how before we had these technologies, every single topo map you see, every single one of those lines was hand drawn.
Yeah.
From teams that were, you know, like Mike was saying in the beginning, back athletes, like they're out there surveying, and in many cases getting shockingly accurate results from just like compasses and whatnot, and then bring them back into the lab and off those points.
I always thought that was amazing how you see old maps that they're clearly hand drawn, but that it's like covering an expansive space where it's like, how did they know what the whole coastline of Alaska looked like in the 1800s or whatever, right? It's like they're just mind blowing that they're able to piece it together, and like it's like oblong a little bit, or I just got like a certain component to it. We're like, oh, that's not exact, but
there we go.
Really detailed.
There's a sick map that my grandmother made.
Are you serious?
Yeah, like Berkshire County in Massachusetts. And yeah, she like used to do that. She like had like a light table, and this is her. She's like a cartographer. She hand drew the whole thing.
That's incredible. Oh my gosh, and relief shading too. That's awesome.
Yeah, that's incredible.
Yeah, it's correct. But yeah, it just blows my mind because we can just render this automatically now.
Yeah, that's incredible. That is putting the art in cartography. That's nuts.
Cool.
Yeah, so think about the next time you're using a topo map, Will, just pour one out for the homie who had to draw those lines.
Pour one out for the homie.
Because that is like hard to believe. In fact, when the one second earliest. Yeah. There's Eratosthenes or something. I have no idea how to pronounce his name. But 240 BC, this guy measured the Earth and was like something ridiculous, like within 2% of the modern accepted value.
What?
Wasn't it like something where he? Oh man, yeah, I learned about this in school.
He was like visiting another town, and he noticed that the sun in their well was like at a different angle at the same time of day. Somehow he like put that together, and then like knowing the distance between the two wells, or measuring it himself, and then like at the same time of day, like measuring the distance and angle. Then like,
which mean like same time of day wasn't like all right, and we're there. Like that's pretty phenomenal too, right? I mean, that is an accomplishment. That's amazing.
He just did the math, and it was like pretty darn close. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. We've come a long way since then, but yeah, no, maps are in the blood.
Hey, thank you everybody for joining. Connor crushed it.
Awesome.
Hey,
to learn.
Great.
Yeah.
Can you send out those links of everything you showed us, of the several websites? I mean, not Google Maps, but the other a couple of the other ones.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I'm sure, and Rachel and Kate should add anything that they have as well. Kate, we didn't get to hear much from you about your GIS wizardry, but transportation side of things, that's like a whole other realm.
Yeah.
Like the civil side of things I have no familiarity with that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not. I mean, I feel like our main goal, we have like 50 bajillion goals actually. It's like how can we create our data in the best way that it best serves our teams and best serves the public. So getting good LiDAR is a big part of that. Yeah, it's multifaceted, but convo for another time.
Yeah, I was gonna say,
Yeah.
we'll have more full tables with mapping and in the future.
Yeah, we should have Mike back on and tell us all about your concept of meetings.
I think the next one should be a real map, and we have to draw some work grid squares and use our protractors, and
We'll take our computers out and do land nav.
Yeah, I mean, I'll get lost ultimately, but night navigation, that's the worst. That was gonna be my one question for you, Connor. Have you ever been out and gotten yourself turned around a little bit, and obviously not completely lost because you're sitting back home? Have you ever been up there? Because I mean, you're in the middle of nowhere. Have you ever, at any point, been like, "Oh shoot"? I mean, I guess you have your GPS on you at all times, and it's never the battery's
for the most part, I would like the one time that comes to mind is classic. I've told you stories about this guy I did the kayak trip with, right?
Which one?
Like when I did that big kayak trip.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I think you did tell me this story. Yeah, that's funny.
Yeah, but when we were in Sitka and we were like a couple weeks out from Freeburn Mountain, and we spent like 2 days in Sitka, and I wanted to get in I wanted to move my legs and get in a practice hike because like we'd been sitting in kayaks for weeks, and we were gonna hike up to Verstovia Peak, which is right above Sitka. It's a really cool, stunning peak. And at the top, my partner told me that he didn't like heights, which is so great. And it was like the theme of the trip was like he would tell me his fears like as we were in the middle of it. We it was so brutal, but we took a trail up to like more or less the top, and then the final part's like a pretty exposed scramble, but at the bottom of it, I was like, well, I'm gonna go to the summit, and like you can head back down the trail if you want. And I was like, then from the summit, I'm probably gonna there's another trail down that next valley, and I'm gonna follow the ridge line like away, and then drop down like one of those sub ridges that look a little easier, and try to get to that trail and then like make it a loop. I'll meet you at the bottom. And he had like the one mat between us, and he was like on a trail that he had to like follow back. Like it was the trail we came up on, and he was like, "Do you mind if I keep the map?" And I was like, "Do you really need it?" But like, okay, take it. And then after I summited, I like followed the ridge further out, and like fog came in extremely quickly. I had like really limited visibility, and I came across, it was like all these bad things at once. And I came across a brown bear like on the ridge, like shortly thereafter. And then I had to like detour down and around to get around the bear. And by the time I came back up to the ridge, I'd gone like way past the ridge I thought I was going to be going down. So I started like kind of blindly descending this like face into the fog, and it ended up being like probably the most dangerous part of the whole trip. Like one of the most dangerous moments of like my life was like descending that face and like having to use alder trees as like ropes to rappel down these like cliff faces and things like that. And it was like the sketchiest thing ever. And at the bottom, I was like having to like toboggan, like water slide through like thorn thickets and things like that. And I ended up like in a canyon. It wasn't even the right canyon. And it was like the biggest mess ever. And all I was thinking was like, if I had to damn that.
Connor, I am 100% telling mom to watch this recording.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, Angiana's gotta see this.
Oh man, that's so good.
Yeah.
And I was like, all I need to do is get to the
story
bottom.
I was looking for.
And I was like, at the bottom, there's gonna be a trail, and like, all I need to do is get there. And I got to the bottom, and I was like, I almost couldn't believe I like survived it. My like my body was so wrecked that I would get to like certain cliffs that you couldn't go. They're just too big to go down, so I'd have to like go back up and around. And like my like arms were starting to like seize up, and like I was getting like arm like cramps, like just trying to like hold on to these like ropes basically. And I finally make it down, and there's no trail to be found. And it turns out like in some side canyon, and I'm like wading through water and like over waterfalls for like 2 miles until I finally hit the trail.
What? This story is like The Revenant Part 1.
Yeah. I think you would have given up at the brown bear and just been like, all right, we're done. Like,
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
Do you think having had studied the map as well as you did helped you stay calm in that situation?
Well, I mean, at that point, I knew it was like I needed to get down, and once I got down,
follow the way the water runs.
yeah. And then from there, it was like, well, I'm following the water. I'm not going upstream.
Yeah.
And I was like waiting after like a very long time. I like see a little footbridge with a trail across the creek.
How many times did you curse your partner out during?
And I like meet up with him in the trailhead, and I had just gone like through like a very emotional, like semi-near-death experience. And
He's like, oh, I guess I didn't really need the map.
He's like, there, like texting on the GPS. Yeah.
Oh my
That was great. Yeah. That was a pretty intense day.
Yeah.
no point or like.
Yeah, it sounds like it for sure. Jesus.
And that was definitely one where I the lack of map hurt me pretty bad. Although also like at that point with zero visibility, like whenever you have fog moving like that, that's just like a extenuating factor. Yeah, that's pretty intense.
I mean, kind of the fog. That's like, I'm convinced that's how people like Alex Honnold and some of those guys do like the free solo stuff. That's going to be their demise, because it's not that they like slip on a rock or something. It's they lose track of where they are on the rock, right? And then suddenly you're in a spot that's unknown to you. And yeah, you practiced it 1,000 times before. Like, they always say that. Oh, well, this is my first time doing the route. I've done it 1,000 times. But if you're working your way up, you lose track of where you are, or you make one move different than you're supposed to. You're off, and it's all like a guessing game at that point with climbing. That is, man, that's scary.
Yeah, it's funny because I feel like with climbing, I wouldn't worry about it as much because you're operating in such a limited scope that like after like a handhold or two that wasn't right, you'd be like, wait, what's going on? This isn't.
I know, but like at that point, you're just completely. I mean, I'm sure those guys have a better grasp of it than I would, but like, it's yes, you have a certain scope, but like you're on a huge piece of granite. You know, it's not like, oh, well, this part is where the rock is all purple. It's like, yeah, I'm on granite and I made one wrong move. Shoot, where was I just now? And how can I get back there? That's how those guys. Yeah, that's scary to me. Oof.
Yeah.
Anyway, fog thought.
I like that. So shower thoughts.
They have a lot more to worry about than just fog, though. Like, I mean.
Yeah, honestly, I think fog's like lethal. They're considered.
Granite chip. Yeah, God, man, those guys are.
Yeah, they're pretty insane.
Yeah, Alex Honnold like doesn't have any activity in his amygdala or whatever that was on free solo. Like, it's black.
Yeah.
That's why he gets that. No one else can. It's very simple. Part of your brain does not function.
Yeah.
I love like watching that guy speak.
All right. Hey, before we start ripping apart Alex Honnold,
we should stop the video. Yeah.
Don't.
This is off-brand for me.
No.
Very off-brand.
Hey, I'm gonna call it because it's 10:30 at the DC folk land.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Well, I definitely want to have you all be part of another full table in the future. If you want to share, that's something that I always am eager to have new faces. And I mean, that's kind of the fun part about full table is everybody has something to share, right? Like, hey, it could be CrossFit. It could be your time in the military. It could be living in Germany. It could be like anything in your life that you want to explore and just kind of share. So yeah, Conor, thank you for doing it. But I think we should say goodnight.
Sweet.
All right, guys. Great job, Will.
Good night, everybody.
Shouldn't do much. Thanks, guys.
Thanks a
Rachel,
lot.
see you around DC.
Yeah, meet up. Once this is over.
Once this is over, yeah. Ciao. Stay healthy.
Bye, everyone.
Yes.
Bye, Lace.